Have you ever heard your child hanging out with their friends and been shocked by the bad words that come out of their mouth, wondering where your sweet little angel has gone and worrying that this language is going to be the new norm for them? Well, you're not alone. Nearly every parent has to choose how to navigate swearing with their kids at some point. Today, I'm going to walk you through how to respond when your child starts swearing using my 5 C's parenting framework, so you'll feel confident the next time you hear come out of their mouth. The key thing in the communication step when dealing with swearing is deciding upon your family protocols. So family protocols are going to vary markedly. It might be that your family says no cursing, or it might be that your family says it's totally fine, there's no censorship here. Or maybe it's okay to curse at home, but it's not okay to curse in public. Whatever you decide, the key thing is that you choose what works for your family and decide on that family protocol. So regardless of where you are on that spectrum, come up with a decision and stick to it. And so you want to consult with your partner if you have one. Maybe you even ask your kids what their opinion is, and then you come to that final decision that you're going to stick with. And the key here is going to be communicating that to your children and letting them know the rationale. Personally, I fall somewhere in the middle, and I ask that my kids not use curse words in the home. And my main rationale for that is that it makes them appear more aggressive and it kind of creates a more negative tone in the home. It also makes them appear less bright, and they're actually very smart kids with great vocabularies. And so I want them to be practicing those skills and to be seen as kids with those assets. And also, it can be potentially offensive to other people unknowingly. So if they start using curse words and other people hear, they might not even realize that they're offending them. So those are the 3 things that I mention to my kids when I justify our family rule that we don't curse in the home. I really emphasize the fact that they are a good, smart kid, and that cursing makes it harder for people to see that. And that I want their actions to reflect who they are and to reflect their actual wonderful vocabulary. And so I focus on that one as the main rationale. There are a couple other things I toss into, like it deprives them of the opportunity to develop greater emotional intelligence. So part of emotional intelligence is identifying and naming and managing emotions. And if they're just using curse words to substitute for emotions, they're not getting into the habit of saying, oh my gosh, this is so frustrating. If instead there's just like a bleep in there every sentence, they're not actually identifying fully the emotions that they're feeling and learning how to name them, which is part of the steps towards then being able to better manage those emotions and develop those coping skills. And lastly, I'll also mention in the rationale that the more they practice using these words at home, the more likely it is that they'll slip out in the future. So going back to that, you may unintentionally offend somebody. It's going to happen more often if you practice those words at home and you get into the habit and you form that neural connection of just thinking about that word quickly it comes to mind. And you may be at a job interview one day and say something that you'll regret. So it's just great to get out of the habit of using curse words. So as with most things in parenting and in life in general, finding that right balance somewhere between the extremes is often the way to go. But the most important thing is to have clearly communicated your family protocol on swearing, regardless of where you stand on that spectrum from none to have at it. Now, we'll talk shortly in the consequences category about how to uphold those family protocols. But for now, let's move on to the second C in my 5 C's parenting framework, consistency. When it comes to swearing, you want to consistently state and uphold the family protocol that we just talked about. Beyond that, the most important thing is to consistently show your child that this is a behavior that warrants feedback, a behavior that's separate from them as a person. It doesn't define their essential goodness and value to your family. So this is the concept of unconditional positive regard. It's a therapeutic concept that comes from a humanistic therapist, Carl Rogers. In the grand scheme of things, though, there are so many ways that your child can show you that they are good and worthy of love and a meaningful part of your family. And you can focus on those while keeping swearing as sort of an independent behavioral issue that can be addressed on top of all of that good stuff. Now, I recently chatted with a mom in my coaching program who used to literally wash her kids' mouths out with soap if they said a bad word. Let me know in the comments if that has ever happened to you as a kid. And the gist in talking with her was that she realized over time that there were bigger battles that she needed to address in her parenting. And she said that ultimately her kids learned not to use curse words, and it didn't need to be such a major part of their development to have that somewhat traumatic experience of having their mouths washed out with soap. And so ultimately they learned how to use the rest of their vocabulary. So in this consistency mindset, do consistently address the behavior of swearing if it's important to you to help your children minimize that behavior. But try to pick your battles and just see the bigger perspective here. So unless for some reason swearing is a huge, horrible offense in your family, then focus more on the relationship with your child. You can consistently but gently guide them while always letting them know that they are loved and respected, even if their specific behaviors are not to your liking. Next, let's look at swearing from a developmental psychology perspective. In my 5Cs parenting framework, I talk about the concept of developmental checkpoints. And one thing to include here is work by psychologist Emmerson looking at the development of one's personality over their lifetime. And he talks about different stages that people go through. The time when your kids are really often starting to do more swearing and you're getting concerned. We're talking about that preteen, teen period typically, sometimes earlier, especially just given changes in their environment and what they're exposed to. But during this preteen, teen phase, we're having kids who are dealing with really this emotional crisis focused on identity and role confusion. Who am I? What's my role? What do I want to be like? Who do I want to model off of after? Teens are heavily influenced by their peers. They're trying on these new roles, seeing what's going to fit for them, and forming their lasting identities separate from their parents' identities. And it can be actually a really awkward experience for them to try out these new roles and get feedback from other people. And it can be hard for them to also separate their personality themselves in one situation, like at home as a child, to another situation, like at school as a student, to a situation where they're just being friends and hanging out. And so it's really a challenging time period that kids work through as they develop this identity. So your children may be acting one way with their friends and may be acting differently at home. And so I had a parent in my coaching program say that his son, when he was with his friends, was cursing like crazy, and he was so worried he didn't know if he should be doing something at home to counter that. And that's why it's so important to really clearly state what your family protocol is. And you can specify if your child gets to an age where they're spending time alone with friends, then you can specify, hey, is it okay to curse with your friends? And what about if you're with your friends in the privacy of their home? Or what about if you're with your friends downtown and there's strangers nearby? And really make it clear what behavior you hope to see from your child in those different situations. Setting up this checkpoints concept, I think it can be helpful to view this as a normal developmental stage. It helps to boost your patience with the process of your child experimenting with cursing. And it can also really help you to hone in on your family protocol and how it extends once they start separating from you and spending more time with their friends. Now let's tie this into the consequences category. But before I move on, my analytics show me that about 94% of you enjoy watching my videos but are not subscribed to my channel. So if you're enjoying this video, consider hitting the subscribe button to support my work. Now on to consequences. As much as we want to show our children acceptance and pick our battles, as we talked about in the communication and consistency categories, it's also important to uphold those family protocols. So you clearly stated your protocols. And often that will involve some different boundaries around different locations. So what's okay at home, what's okay with your friends at their homes, what's okay in public. And obviously you may not be with your child in all those situations. So you can ask them how things went, ask them how they're behaving in those situations, but where you have the most control is at home. So if you've decided, similar to me, that you don't want cursing to be a big thing in your house, then you want to uphold the boundaries in that location. So sometimes your child will test the limits and they'll use a curse word. And what you want to do here is think about maintaining that boundary in a soft and loving way. I've talked in previous videos about using this visual or analogy of a velvet-lined box. So the walls of the box are the boundary. So, we're not going to curse in our home. That's the boundary. And it doesn't have to be a super tight boundary. Maybe there are some very mild words allowed, like darn. Maybe darn's allowed. But then if you let the walls get too loose, then you're including too many words. It goes beyond your comfort level. So you need to find that happy medium there in the size of the box. And then it's the velvet layer that reminds you to be gentle in how you enforce the boundaries in your home. So it might be just a gentle verbal reminder like, appropriate language, please. Or it may be asking them to use a little behavioral rehearsal strategy and say, please try again, so that they practice using non-cursing words. That's really great for forming those pathways, making sure that they're practicing proper ways to speak to really show their intelligence and show their niceness. And if needed, you can get more extreme and you might need to remove them from a situation. If you ask them gently to be mindful of the words and they continue to use curse words, you might ask them to step out of the room, depending on where you are. I had a video recently where I talked about using curse words at the tennis court. And if you say to your child, like, hey, you need to stop cursing or we're going to have to leave, then the consequence needs to be followed through on. And the next time they curse, you actually leave. So I'll link to that video here if you haven't caught it. It was really a fascinating learning experience for me to see the importance of following through on consequences. So wrapping up the consequences category, consistently upholding your family protocols around swearing quickly teaches your child to follow the rules. Now it's time for our fifth and final step in my 5 C's parenting framework. We'll wrap up with 2 points from the check yourself category, where I help parents in my coaching program to get intentional about how they want to parent their kids and the impact that they have on their parent-child relationship. First, just remember that your child cursing does not make you a bad parent. It's a normal part of development. So the more you can remind yourself of that, the more patient you'll be and the less likely you will be to really snap at them and make this an unpleasant experience. You can really just focus on the gentle reminders for the most part, and kids usually understand that cursing just isn't something that's going to be allowed in your home. If that's the way you decide to go, you might decide to have cursing and then it's much easier, right? And then second would be try not to use overly strict rules. This tends to lead to kids who internalize, rebel, or resent. So when I was speaking with the dad about being alarmed that his son was cursing with his friends, I said, I wouldn't sweat it. That way he's getting to try it out. He's getting it out of his system. He's in a safe space with friends. They're doing the same, so it's fitting in. But still uphold your rules at home. So you're not being overly strict. You're not saying no cursing ever, whether I'm there or not. That's just going to be too much. It's going to be hard to enforce, and it may lead your child to really rebel even more. So in summary, I suggest that you pick your party line and stick to it, but don't stress too much over this. Now, if you like this organized way of solving parenting challenges using the 5 C's parenting framework, check out my next video where I'll do a deep dive on the 5 C's, and you can learn how to train yourself to start thinking in this helpful way. Keep up the good work on your amazing parenting journey.